We are very excited about this observance because these are very special students and very special communities, our American Indian, Alaska Native communities. We held an engagement for youth here in this building, Native American Roundtable Youth. 2 students who were on that, Tristan and Adriano, come to mind. They kind of stood out as questions were put to these young people. One of the questions that was asked, why do our Native American students still have to put up with dealing with stereotypes on a school campus? Things like mascots, things like team names. I will not say the name of the Washington professional football team. I call it the Washington football team. You're welcome. Yes. What about all of the stereotypes that our American Indian Alaska Native students have to endure? They asked another question. They said, why do schools so often reject us for the way we look? There was a story in the news not long ago about a 5-year-old, a kindergarten student, a little boy who was sent home because he had long hair and braids. And it was against the school rules for some reason for little boys to have long hair and braids, and they sent him home. And he could only come back to school after he had a note from his tribal leaders that it was somehow his tribal custom. Why would something like that happen? Another question they asked was, why are we missing from the history books? Why do we open a history book and it goes from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War, and we never talk about the Trail of Tears? I remember being a high school student, like 15 years ago, in Brigham City, Utah. And I remember a teacher, Mr. Fleming, the social studies teacher, who had us read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And here I was, 16 years old, going, that couldn't have happened. No, that's not my government. No, and they're talking about presidents at the time, and you've never heard anything about these presidents except that they're on this dollar bill, or that we don't teach the truth. This teacher actually went to some risk to give us something that was not on the prescribed curriculum, that was not in the book. He said, I want you to read this because it's not in our official history book. And we're going to talk about things that our government did to people who were here before we were. We are, if you weren't an American Indian Alaska Native, you are an immigrant. You come from immigrant stock. And to read that was amazing. It's not unusual to hear those kinds of questions from these very articulate young people, fearless young people. And then you realize that we gave them a venue. They had a venue to actually discuss these things. You look at the statistics, and they're frightening. Our American Indian Alaska Native students have the highest dropout rates. They, like our African American students, have discipline rates of expulsion higher than other populations. And they have the highest suicide rates because the hope is actually just sucked from their hearts. Tristan and Adriano are going to beat the odds They are so full of hope. They are so full of expectations. They hold themselves to incredibly high standards. They talk about the importance not just of educators who are culturally competent to serve them as their teachers, as the support staff, as the principals, but they are absolutely sure that if you have a curriculum that embraces their language, that teaches history, that teaches their culture, dance, and music, where they go to school, those things are happening. And you know what? The math scores are going up. Not because test and punish, not because of drill and kill, but because they want to come to school, because their attendance rates go up, because they're excited to be there, and they feel respected. So that gives me such hope. Where's Tim Parker? Tim, what's the name of the school that I visited in Fairbanks that is the Alaska Native School? Yes. I went when I was on a school tour last year to, and by the way, it's a charter school, but it's a charter school supported by the local association that helps. They're the ones that gave me the tour of this school. So again, whenever someone says charter, I say this was a charter school that said we embrace Native culture and we actually bring other people in to see how it can be done. It's used to inform the broader community of schools in the public schools. And what I saw there just knocked my socks off. The embrace of the community, the elders that had a special room for the elders that routinely came into the school to give lessons to the children on culture, on crafts, on music, on dance, on art. And everything was this incredibly nurturing, respectful environment. We're seeing how you can do it right. And it is amazing. And we are so appreciative of the special guest from the White House, not this, another one, from the White House that is here to talk about a very special initiative. And to introduce our guest is Mary Levi, who is the chair of the American Indian Alaska Native Caucus and is one of our newest board of directors. Please welcome Mary.
Why, good morning, Board of Directors. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, Mr. Bill Mendoza. And throughout the nation, Native educators tell us that indivisibility is a major reason Native students feel disconnected from their school and why they are not making significant progress in their higher levels of high school and college. And we know that Native students are not a large percentage of the public school population as other ethnic students. However, as Native students walk in our classrooms, in our school buildings, and ride our buses, and sit in our classrooms, they are environmentally reminded of how invisible they are. This is unacceptable, and we can change it, and we have made steps towards doing that by taking a stand on institutional racism in last July. This is why I bring you Mr. Bill Mendoza. He is determined to make the American Indian Alaska Native voice visible by being the voice right here in Washington, D.C. President Obama appointed Mr. Mendoza to serve as the executive director of the White House Initiative on American Indian Alaska Native Education, and he started to serve in this role in 2011. The White House Initiative on American Indian Alaska Native Education, and boy, that's a long name, is designated to help expand educational opportunities and improve educational outcomes for all American Indian and Alaska Native students. Mr. Mendoza grew up on the Pine Ridge and Rosebud Sioux reservations in South Dakota. He has experienced firsthand the multitudes of challenges facing American Indian students, educators, and tribes. Mr. Mendoza earned a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities from Fort Lewis College and a Master's of Education from Montana State University. He has worked as a language arts teacher at Pine Ridge High School in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, while also pursuing a doctorate in education leadership at Montana State University. He served as a principal at Monforton School in Bozeman, Montana. Prior to serving as an executive director of the White House Initiative on American Indian Alaska Native Education, Mr. Mendoza served as director and senior advisor to the Secretary of American Indian Alaska Native Education Policies. He has often spoke eloquently about the challenges faced by families who are destabilized by substance abuse, hunger, and the harsh realities that show up in our classrooms and continue the cycle of generations of young people in hopelessness and despair. He knows of the ghosts of bygone eras when Indian students were forced into boarding schools, had their hair forcefully cut, and were beaten for speaking their native languages. He hears and he sees how the breakdown in the culture continues to haunt Indian country today. Mr. Mendoza is on a mission to give those young Americans, young Native Americans, the respect, love, resources, and support they deserve. We couldn't have asked for a better friend in Washington. Mr. Mendoza is more than a friend of NEA, he is our partner. The White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaska Native Education launched the first ever environments listening tour to hear from schools and communities about the ways to better meet the needs, the unique needs of educational and culturally related academic needs of Native American students. The listening sessions focused on school environment, bullying, student discipline, and offensive imagery and symbolism. We are very excited about this opportunity and look forward to working with Mr. Mendoza on this initiative. It is clear that education for our Native students have been in a state of neglect for far too long. But it is also clear that the people are rising up and they are waking up to fight for the possibility of real change and are making a real impact. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Bill Mendoza.
Mitakiapi, Eyechalia Yuha Lila Chante Washte Nape Chiu Zapalo. Lakol Chaje Mitraki Trawaha Chanka Wakangle Washichu Ia Bill Mendoza Emachiapalo. Oglala na Sichangu Titrua Lakota Ocheti Shakoi or Maohetru. I greet you all in the Lakota language, a beautiful language, but of course I'm biased. I greet you all as relatives and extend my heartfelt handshake to you all this morning. And thank you for having me here to address this important body. Thank you to all of our leadership, particularly the leadership represented here with me today. My good friend Samantha Aldridge, who works very diligently on your behalf here in Washington, D.C., and working with offices such as mine. I can't say enough about the kind of leadership demonstrated here and what it takes to champion these issues. I always say the only thing harder than being an Indian expert is an expert Indian and representing 567 different tribes and what that feels like in a day-to-day decision-making kind of basis. Very burdensome, very, very challenging for those of us. And we need more to this work. And I can't, I wish I could just listen to these two ladies talk about these issues. They're hit on every pulse point that is not only been on our radar since this president came to try to affect those areas, but are so encouraging to hear such an important body such as NEA to be able to reflect those kinds of challenges in a conversation among you all. The social justice caucuses are critical. Those are the voices. You know that. That's why you created them. That's why President Eccleston created these. The challenges are, what do you do next? You can no longer plead ignorance. You can no longer plead innocence in that you did not know the issues. It is very clear to me that you have the resources here in front of you, and the unique perspectives that you bring to these conversations also equip you with the challenges that are facing our population. And I say our not in the paternalistic sense that our office has historically driven these issues, but our in that we must now and into the future take explicit responsibility for that unique relationship that your ancestors, my ancestors, shook hands with one another, cared for one another, and said we will have a solemn obligation to one another, unique like no other, and in fact treated as we treated relationships of the day, a nation-to-nation, government-to-government relationship. And so when you say American Indian and you say Alaska Native, those are the first things that come to my mind. When you say Native American, you speak of the plight of what is connected beyond that, those who have not been able to reestablish or have honored those responsibilities, namely our Native Hawaiian brothers and sisters, our state-recognized tribes, and those who are unrecognized by anyone other than their own identity and organization. And the challenges to these issues for us as a nation couldn't be more representative of what we're facing as a world. You talk to a Native American, you talk to an American Indian, Alaska Native, better yet, you talk to an Ogallala, a Sachangu, or a Tlingit, you find out real quick that diversity didn't all of a sudden fall into our lap with the expansion of Hispanics in this country or the influx of other nationalities at any juncture. Folks, we were diverse for over thousands of years, millennia if you go by our creation stories. We have walked and talked the notion of living in coexistence and relative peace and harmony, contrary to my own tribe having colonistic tendencies. But those have always been put into check by the notion of how to live sustainably. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, not only in that history, but the folks who bring those messages to our communities on a daily basis. Indian country is still here. 33 states have one or more tribes in their boundaries. We number about 2.9 million now. I think the numbers are going to go up here, 2.5 in their most recent census. The student population, over 37% of our population are under the age of 18. Vast majority of the populations live off of reservations to the tune of 50, 70%. The challenge in that dynamic is that our leaders, our elected leaders, say to themselves, just as President Obama might say to himself, if 93% of our populace is educated outside of our country, what does that mean to the backbone of our country, the health and wellness of us not only sustaining our country, but rebuilding it in many other ways? That's what every tribal leader has on the back of their mind. And the challenge to that is 95% of our American Indian Alaska Native students attend schools, school districts, where they are less than 10% of the population. That means they're not just a minority. That means they're almost invisible, if not invisible. Because the very protections, personally identifiable information, or FERPA, that we put on those students renders us being able to fully examine their issues in the most meaningful ways. And that is an issue that we have to grapple with. And so these extenuating circumstances necessitate us to develop unique ways of engaging with this population. Take the issue you care about: access, equity, school discipline, bullying, addressing differentiation in the classroom so that those lessons are relevant and meaningful to those students, so that they're equipped with all those added value knowledge and skills in addition to preservation of their identity and culture, whether you're Hispanic, Latino, Asian American, woman, male, from this economy or that economy. All of those challenges are not reaching our students for that very reason. And it's been a while for our initiative to come to the full realization of how to approach that issue and where does its prevalence rest in the work that we do on a governance level, on a systemic level. Those decision makings that Madam President spoke to just now. Why should we be focusing on these periphery issues when we have much more core issues? And I come from the community of Pine Ridge, but this past year, over 12 children killed themselves. And they are in a state of crisis on every indicator, every outcome, some of which were invoked by these ladies here. And yet I travel the country talking to Native youth to hear about their concerns. And it rests on those stereotypes. It rests on the behaviors that manifest from those stereotypes. In the way of bullying, in the way of school discipline, and yes, the issue of curriculum. And how our resources, the resources that we put in front of our students, the strategies that we teach them to access those resources is all affecting their lives as they look to map it. As they map it across their lives, it is so tragic how principally normal they have to navigate this space. They have to deal with this because their mother dealt with it and their grandmother dealt with it, and we're teaching those coping skills down the line. And I had to experience this firsthand as a parent because I grew up in Pine Ridge where you knew the lines. It's not blurred, it's very concrete. You go to communities like Shattern and Rushville, you're off the reservation. You go to Rapid City, that's not your community anymore. That's someone else's community. I grew up either having to talk my way out, run my way out, or fight my way out in many of these circumstances. And thankfully, and fortunately, I had much more support than the vast majority of my peers. And so when I brought my 9-year-old and my 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and 2-year-old to this, our nation's capital, my 9-year-old came in as a first grader. And then we had, of course, my 7-year-old transition into that system. And so when my 9-year-old was a first grader, it was tough. He has braids. He wears double braids, triple braids as a young Lakota Hokshila, a young boy. He's pretty good looking, but again, I'm biased. And to the uninformed eye, he would look like a girl. The long hair, it's amazing how biased we are in our cultural norms. They also wear earrings, as is traditional with our young men and our men. Forgive me, I forgot mine this morning. And when he was navigating that school system, the same behaviors that I was hearing from the Native youth that I was talking to simultaneously across the country were being experienced within my household. Pulling his hair, trying to cut his hair, asking him if he's a girl. Every sporting event, every environment he stepped into, this is what he faced. And he's rooted in his identity. We staffed this when we come back. We debriefed this. We're very active parents. My wife, more active than me, obviously. But we've dealt with this. We had to go in, we had to present, we had to share, we had to say, boys have long hair too. Cultures are different. Not all the Indians look this way. He had to navigate that emblem, that symbol, that name, and come back and have conversations with us about that. And I kept thinking, this is how it is. We're going to have to inform them. Maybe we can do this from the top down, through the words of our leaders and others, do this from the top down. And we got to a place with my son where everything was good. Everything was good. And it moved on in a way. Teacher left, principal left, counselor left, social worker left. We're starting all over again with my 7-year-old. It's the same conversations again, some of it different, the actors certainly different. And what happened, the turning point for me on this issue was when I walked into that classroom, I was ready to give all these non-native, forgive me, these white kids the stink eye. Because mandatory reporter, educator aside, educational leader, aspiring and perspiring, I walked in there and I was ready to stare down. I was going to, all those went out the window. all the training, they were messing with my boy, and I was going to give him the stink eye. And when I walked in there, something happened that I just did not expect. This was one of the first weeks of school that my first grader was there. That child was Asian. That child was Salvadorian. They're Arabic. They're African. Couldn't even pick out an African American. When I thought I had a white kid, they were Ukrainian. And what hit me then, and what has resonated since then, is that what is in the way of the absence of curriculum, whether it's inaccurate, not enough, or harmful, and then this imagery and symbolism that precedes us in a historical way, which subsequently dehumanizes us, is not just about my children, it's about your children. If not more than mine, it's about your children. Because in that sense, it is inhibiting them to be able to reconcile that historical figure with the person who is standing in front of them. And this is where the research is taking us, folks. It's saying that those who raise up these images and symbols, they have a false sense of efficacy in that, of community, of connection. And it's like a drug. They have to keep doing it in order to keep feeling that feeling. And so while it compounds those who have to experience it, my children, their children, it is simultaneously having that effect on our children. So that's what makes this issue about student climate and how we're going to be informing the country about how this not only affects their students, but ours as well. And even at that, the research is telling us is that maybe, we know that this is compounding self-esteem because it gets worse for those students in those same contexts, but it's actually more harmful that we don't have any positive American Indian, Alaska Native figures, history, content, experiences, stories, connection, differentiated instruction to scaffold the kind of, if not be the foundation of what those students are experiencing. So I see these as parallel tracks, one that has to quickly go away, be retired, be a moment of antiquity. And this is a deep conversation within Indian country ourselves. The imagery and symbolism that we hold up for ourselves might be something of antiquity for how we proceed in the 21st century of this nationhood. And so these are the important conversations that a report being released here in this month, we hope to put in your hands. And the call to action that I want to talk to you and your leadership about, you have already set out on an important path to address this, which is to listen to Native youth. Ask them this question. Your school boards, your boards of education, those public comment periods, our people aren't going to show up to those. One, you don't speak the same language that they do. They may speak English, but you're not speaking the same language. Two, you've let them down time and time again on this issue. The costs far outweigh the benefits of them having to have an honest conversation with you on this issue. So these extenuating circumstances necessitate unique strategies to be able to address them. We want you to sit down with Native youth as we did, have pre-sessions with them, have the kinds of dialogues that if you wanted your voice to be heard and you wanted to be able to bring organic thought to a current issue or challenge or expose things that you don't even know, how would you design that for youth especially? That will be the call to action. We're going to provide information, technical assistance to that effect, and data to show where these are at. One of the challenges with these mascots and logos is we didn't know where they were, and they're just the tip of the iceberg. I was in South Dakota, Sisseton, South Dakota, as a matter of fact, where they have an annual coronation at homecoming, cloaked in the darkness of school assembly for those who take issue with it, but tradition for those who value it. And that is happening all over the eastern side of that state, maybe the whole state, where it's coronations, halftime spectacles, reenactments of homesteading, things that are trauma related, and certainly these students are not understanding what is happening to them on both ends of the spectrum. And the states where the most challenging is where we have not only little representation in way of tribal organization, but where the students are but of a handful within those school districts. The exception, Oklahoma, huge prevalence there. Again, I point to the tragic normalcy of this imagery and symbolism. Texas, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. I'm going to get to know you, directors. I need to get to know you if we're going to be able to affect this issue and challenge into the future. And so I applaud you allowing the time for us to have this conversation here today. Thank you to your leadership for addressing it. There are 2,500, just shy of 2,500 of these mascots and logos in the country. Smart people like Zeitler and Dr. Freiberg have studied some of these issues, and about 61% of them raise this element of potential harm to all of our students, especially our Native students. And so we want to have that conversation and dialogue with you as we begin to dig deeper on these issues and challenges for these students. And that's not stepping aside from all those other core issues that we have to pursue parallel, but learn this as I learned it. They are inextricably tied to one another. Our inability to address this issue affects our inability to better serve those students who are considering the loss of their life, who have no opportunities and are facing very real barriers to the access and equity challenges that they face. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for having me here.